Hello everybody, here we are today and we're going to be doing our season preview over the Detroit Red Wings, talking about whether or not the Wings are going to be able to actually complete a push to get to the playoffs. So before we get started with it, please make sure to subscribe if you're new to me or hockey, whatever the case may be. That being said, let's get on into it. So last season the Red Wings ended up finishing with 91 points on the year, and it wasn't good enough to make the playoffs. And we're looking at this Detroit side and realizing the fact that they've spent nearly 10 years outside of the playoff bubble, if you will. And it's hard knowing that they were right there this past season until a late run of bad play ended up kicking them out of a playoff spot. But I do feel like this team is got a lot of reasons to be optimistic. And I know every year we keep saying, is this going to be the year that they get something done? This year may actually be the year. And I'm excited too because they've re-signed multiple veteran players that could have an impact for them while bringing in some other veteran guys through free agency. And this Red Wings team has been talked about maybe more than some other teams in this past offseason, and for good reason, because they're kind of a fun bunch. They've got a little bit of a weird roster that's got a mix of that youth and that experience, and in some ways it's very odd, which we'll get into here in a little bit. So with all this kind of being brought up here, what are some storylines to watch out for Detroit for this season? So the first one is whether or not Alex DeBrincat can regain his scoring form. I'm going to be honest with you here. This is a little bit misleading, as DeBrincat finished the season with 27 goals, which isn't too shabby, but looking at how everything kind of panned out, you understand that he had 9 goals in his first 7 games, and I remember making a video about how he just got off to a terrific start, and then the final 75 games of the year, he had 18 goals, which isn't terrible, because again, we know he can contribute offensively besides just scoring goals, but you want to be able to see more from him and just find more consistency. Try to avoid those 8 or 9 game periods where you're goalless and try to, again, contribute more in terms of scoring goals for Detroit, because that's what they want when they got Alex DeBrincat. This is a guy that has scored 40 goals or more on 2 occasions in his career and is a player that you know can be very dangerous. And I know there's some names on this roster where you say they could be good, but we're looking at older guys like Patrick Kane and Vladimir Tarasenko, where their name alone might be a little bit misleading about what they provide to the lineup at this stage in their career. And I do want to add that I'm not discrediting what DeBrincat was able to do last year, just that I think we expect a little bit more out of him, and to find that consistency for a Detroit team that could use more consistency in trying to find a way to get into the playoffs. You want to have a guy that can score 40 goals for you. And I think that out of all these players in this lineup, you'd probably expect him to be that guy that could get there. Although I will say somebody like Lucas Raymond last season that had 31 goals could take another step forward. So I'm not saying it's all going to be on Alex here, but this is a player that other teams before have thought, okay, he could be our guy. So I want him to actually be the guy for Detroit because, again, he's a Michigan guy. Helping the Red Wings in their playoff drought would be fun, and to have another good year for himself would be nice as well. My second storyline is talking about whether or not the Red Wings are really going to rely on a 37-year-old Cam Talbot to get the job done. The answer to this seems to be maybe yes, and I find this to be one of the more puzzling and intriguing and fun storylines for any team that we've covered so far. And the thing with Cam Talbot is he actually had a good year last year, and I think the Red Wings were looking at what the Los Angeles Kings were able to do and say, let's just rip a page out of their book and see if we can make that work for ourselves. Of course, Talbot played for the Kings, and we've talked about on this channel many times how the Los Angeles Kings are fine just having veteran goalies go out there and play for them and play well because they've got a good group in front of them that can probably elevate their play. But I do think I'm a little bit concerned for a variety of reasons as to whether or not Talbot's actually going to be their guy. For one, it does seem like the Red Wings have struggled to find a goalie that can be the guy for them in the past few years, and Talbot is somebody that is looking at the group in front of him, understanding they're probably not going to be as good as LA. Now, that's not to say that Detroit couldn't be better defensively, but they weren't as good as LA at 5-on-5 and on the PK, and in some categories they really did struggle defensively. They had the second highest high danger chances against per 60 on the PK last season, and this is a team that I feel like is going to be needing a goalie to actually be able to elevate them rather than elevating their goalie, and that's why I feel a little bit worried about how things will go here, because Cam Talbot too is another player that hasn't really had to play over 50+ games consistently since the mid-2010s, the late-ish 2010s. So for a player that is nearing 40, that is on a team that's probably going to need him to step up, I have a few reasons to say I don't know how I feel about this. Now, I do think it's going to be fun if Talbot is able to be that guy for them. And we saw him before at one stage in his career play, 73 games where he was just an absolute workhorse for the Oilers that one year, which is crazy. But if he's playing 70 games for Detroit this season, he's either having an incredible year or things are just going awry in the Motor City. So what exactly happens from this? I guess we get to watch out and see, because I think if things are going poorly in front of Talbot, the team is going to struggle as well, and I wouldn't be surprised if they miss the playoffs yet again. But I am hoping for this to be one of the more optimistic and bright stories to develop for us for the course of the year. Cam Talbot, you've been able to do it before, and you've actually had a pretty respectable career. Let's keep things rolling along here as you get near 40. Then the third and final storyline for the Red Wings, talking about whether or not they can get comfortable in close games. Last year, the Red Wings were 4-11 in one-score games. You want to be on the flip side of that. I'm not saying they necessarily have to be 11-4, but for the Red Wings, they were a team that, out of all the teams in the league, I can't say this for a fact, but it does seem like they enjoyed playing out from front. And I know a lot of people say, well, of course, every team wants to play out in front, but in the beginning of the year when things were looking really good for them, where DeBrincat was a scoring machine and all that stuff, they were a side that just like to bury you in the first period especially, but in the second period as well, where maybe they would score 5 goals in the first 2 periods of play and they would be able to win games comfortably, which is always a nice thing to do. But this team is at a spot right now where they continuously go year after year after year, not making the playoffs. Not even that long ago, it wouldn't have been that big of a deal, but we're at this stage with the Red Wings where we can't just keep making excuses for them. I think there's a couple of teams in the league where we keep saying, oh, maybe next year, maybe next year, maybe next year. But at a certain point, there is a time that comes where you have to see the results. And for Detroit, I think they're closer than a lot of other teams. And they've made some moves that I think are very exciting because they could be able to go into the playoffs and maybe make some noise, even though they feel like they're a mishmash of some weird rotations and lines and whatnot. But you also have to look at this too and understand these young guys are not necessarily young anymore. They've got some NHL experience. Some of these players are expected to be top contributors, maybe even top line guys for the Red Wings this season, and they have to be able to produce. We can't just say, oh, this team is young anymore, and it just happens to these younger sides. They can't finish it in close games. They have to be able to execute in those close games. They have to be able to win when things are tied or if they're even trailing. And yeah, it'd be nice to take care of things early on, but at the same time, too, this is the NHL. We've got a lot of travel. There's injuries. There's going to be a lot of things holding you back where you might have an off night, but being able to rally back and maybe get a point in OT, even if you still lose, or being able to win in overtime are all important things. And for a team that could use just a couple extra points to get there, this is how it's going to have to be done. And this isn't necessarily an X's and O's thing, but I think this would be a good thing to put up on the board if you're a member of the coaching staff for Detroit, would be to highlight the fact that this team isn't necessarily locked down when things are close or when they're trailing, and to say we need to have that it factor about us where it says whatever the score is, we can still find a way to get things close, maybe even win. And I think just finding a way to motivate these guys, I know everybody's technically motivated, but to figure out a way to kind of build something here where you can say, oh, well, not only are we a good team when things aren't looking our way, we're actually one of the best teams at playing from behind. Although, of course, too, you don't want to get too comfortable from playing from behind. So overall, what are my thoughts on the Detroit Red Wings? Well, I'm going to be honest, they are possibly the most hyped team that I'm expected to watch for this year, just to see how things pan out, because we've talked about before what the expectations are, but to get to 91 points kind of shows that you are about there. They made some signings like getting Vladimir Tarasenko that are intriguing because, while I said earlier in this video, Tarasenko is not necessarily a guy that is what he used to be. He did just win a Stanley Cup. He's a 2-time Stanley Cup champion. Of course, they got Patrick Kane that is a 3-time Stanley Cup winner. They even had an NHL article about this where Tarasenko basically said something along the lines where he came here to actually play meaningful games. And I think Detroit, of course, is at this spot too, where they want to play meaningful games. This isn't about being a team that gets to the first round. This is about a team that can hopefully do more. Yeah, I know we could probably talk about how they're not very experienced when it comes to playoff games for some of the younger guys, but I don't necessarily buy into that as much. And I think for the Red Wings, it's about just having consistency, like we talked about with, of course, guys like DeBrincat, just being able to be there in and out every single day and not fizzling towards the end of the year like we saw from them. It wasn't a collapse like what we saw with the Philadelphia Flyers, but Detroit realistically should have been a wildcard team, even if it was as a second wildcard spot last year. So with all that being said, I guess you could say that I am in favor of Detroit making the playoffs this year. Might be a little bit biased as I was just up in Michigan, got to see some people wearing some Red Wing stuff out and about. And I'm going to be honest, guys, I am really hoping that I can make it sometime around November to a game. So if you guys are Red Wings fans and I'm going to be up in that area and you guys want to see me at the stadium, just say hey or whatever, that would be cool. So anyway, what are your thoughts on the Detroit Red Wings this season? Do you think that the Red Wings are going to be able to make it to the playoffs? Or do you think this is going to be another year where they miss, even though it feels like this actually is the year? I want it to happen because, again, it's better when you have these original 6 teams that make it to the playoffs. And with Detroit not making it since I was last in high school, it feels very weird. And this is not the team that I remember growing up. So anyway, let me know your thoughts about Detroit for this upcoming season down below in the comments. Also, please make sure to like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're new. Everybody, please make sure to stay safe. Have a great night. And Eagle of Hockey, all right. Goodbye, Brigadiers and Brigadettes. This is your captain signing off. Have a great night.